The interconnection of parthenogenesis, the virgin goddess, and her liminal period. In this chapter, I attempt to show how parthenogenesis and the virgin goddess intertwine to allow for self-transformation and to reach higher states of self-realization. I discuss here the main attributes of the virgin goddess and those qualities that were attached to her parthenogenetic potency in ancient Greece. I then go on to discuss the three phases of rites of passage: separation, margin, and aggregation, focusing on the middle margin stage, better known as the liminal betwixt and between period, to show how they affect self-realization. It is shown that it is in the liminal stage that Menarche connects to the divine as a consequence of the self-generating ability of parthenogenesis women embody through their fertile and reproductive powers. Part 1. Parthenogenesis and the Virgin Goddess. Parthenogenesis, as already stated, originates from the Greek terms for virgin birth, parthenon, virgin, and genesis from the beginning, and is essentially a path to liberation where the divine is worshipped as the Virgin Goddess, being the source of all creation. It's primarily therefore based on goddess worship and has at its heart female fertility powers. Parthenogenesis is considered as female asexual reproduction, being an androgynous or neuter primordial energy, where both masculine and feminine esoteric energies combined lose or reverse their sexual dimorphism, also expressed as being in oneness. Both cosmic creation and their union keeps the whole universe in order. Mythology and folklore are abounded in stories about the origins of the universe through parthenogenesis. This usually involves a primogenitor who creates natural elements without reference to a source, while in others reference is made to inseminating elements or intermedia like the wind, the rain, lightning, thunder, or other symbols, and personifications through which the primordial energy interacts and gives birth to the universe. Early cosmogony myths, such as those explored by Robert Graves in the Greek myths, begin by establishing how ancient Europe regarded the great goddess as immortal and omnipotent, with motherhood being their prime mystery. She took lovers with the intention of satisfying her pleasure and not to necessarily provide her children with a father, as the concept of fatherhood was not introduced into religious thought, and how the hearth which she tended to was in her cave, her primordial womb. The moon's three phases, waxing, full, and waning, record the matriarch's three functional phases of maiden, mother, and crone, whose trilogy formed the triple goddess, a mystical and sacred analogue to demonstrate her divinity, and symbolize the endless cycle of birth, which was the maiden, life, mother, death, the crone, and rebirth being the new or dark moon and the phase of menstruation, including her fertility powers. Prehistorically, pure parthenogenesis was ritualized and honored during what is considered the Matriarchal era, which existed in Minoan Crete, where goddess worshipping and fertility rituals were the religious basis of society. Chronologically, this is the period from the Upper Paleolithic era, beginning about 40,000 years ago, until sometime around 3000 BCE, when a patriarchal-based religion began to take root in society. In accordance with matriarchal studies pioneer Heidi Gottlieb Abendroth, in matriarchal studies on indigenous cultures across the globe, the definition of matriarchy is derived from the Greek word archi, which means beginning. In light thereof, the fact that biologically mothers engender the beginning of life, and hence human culture, matriarchy means the mothers from the beginning. Gottlieb Abendroth makes a very important distinction. Matriarchy isn't the opposite of patriarchy, in that its purpose was to oppress men. Matriarchies are true gender-egalitarian societies. This applies to the social contribution of both sexes, and even though women are at the center, This principle governs the social functioning and freedom of both sexes. Matriarchal societies should emphatically not be regarded as mirror images of patriarchal ones, with dominating women instead of patriarchies dominating men, as they have never needed patriarchies' hierarchical structures. Throughout mainly prehistoric ancient Greece, goddess worship was coexistent with the matrilineal family system, and women worshipped the goddess through sexual rites and considered her as the queen of the heaven, creatrix of the universe and the supreme deity of sexuality and childbirth. Goddess worship not only generated creative energy in women, but also respect for women in men, and the role and status of women in pre-patriarchal societies was apparently rather high. In this culture, our ancient foremothers knew that their fertility cycles were aligned with the moon, menstruation with the new or dark moon, follicular phase with the waxing moon, ovulation with the full moon, and luteal and premenstrual phase with the waning moon. At the heart of ancient Mediterranean matriarchy was the goddess, and at the heart of the goddess tradition was a belief in the divine feminine as Virgin Mother, who created all of existence out of herself. Along with that was the ancient belief that women had the ability to mimic the goddess's virgin motherhood and advance humanity in the earth plane. The ancient belief of how it was possible for the divine spirit to engage in sexual intercourse with a woman and make her pregnant, so as to procreate with her the first beginnings of a generation, was recorded by the Greek Delphic priest Plutarch. Women's wombs, which were recreated in labyrinths, tombs, and caves, and celebrated as the gateway to life, and her menstrual cycles, the ebb and flow of her hormonal fluctuations, reflected in the movement of the darkness of the full moon, which is the menstrual phase, and the lightness of the new moon, ovulation phase, when ritualized, formed the foundation upon which society and culture advanced. Human females are the only primates to have undergone a hormonal shift, availing women to have not only reproductive energy, but also sexual energy, as distinct from the biological urge to reproduce. With this freeing of energy came the possibility for advances in human evolution in terms of more mental energy for social and cultural creations. In Blood, Bread and Roses, author Judy Grant refers to this as metaforms, or metaformic consciousness, suggesting that blood from menstrual rites and other related rites are what created culture, and around which human behavior was formed. Classical archaeologist Joanne Breton Connolly, in Portrait of a Priestess, explains how in the Greek religious system, which developed based on the actual human experience, the pantheon reflected the complexities of what it meant to be male and female, allowing for sexual ambiguity and plurality. The maleness in the female and the femaleness in the male. To be female, therefore, was to be a wild, untamed virgin huntress, marriageable virgin and mother, passionate seductress and wife, as well as wise, male-like warrior and craftsman. To be male was to be a craftsman, warrior, seafarer, father and husband, as well as to be the feminine poet and artist, in addition to being sexually active and the ambiguous reveler. Evidence found of early cults revealed that before female priesthoods were subsumed under patriarchal pantheons in mainland Greece, various deities of the ancient Mediterranean world like Artemis, who was a huntress, Athena, a male-like warrior and craftsman, and Hera, wife, were pure parthenogenetic, self-generating, virgin creatixes who stood as a primordial creative force and who required no male partner to produce the cosmos, earth, life, matter, and even other gods out of her essence. They expressed, in other words, their female human condition independently and to its fullest. It should be clarified that parthenogenesis is not an act of biological conception. rather the highest spiritual achievement. It's a form of spiritual divine birth achieved as a result of reaching wholeness or self-realization. The word virgin, in its original root, means a free woman, one that is radically independent, autonomous, and not attached. A virgin goddess, therefore, is one who is eternally basking in her maidenhood energy, not necessarily untouched, and is both virgin and mother at the same time. Rather than being contradictory, these two primordial forces coexist as virgin motherhood, representing not sterility, but inviolable and sovereign creative power. When a woman finds herself feeling at home in her soul, at one with her own breath, and to her own higher self, she is in a pristine state that reinforces the symbol of virginity. This subsequently means that she is connected to her own inner life. She is the authority on her own in all areas of her life, and most unquestionably, she is taking an active part in becoming divine, by way of awakening her own ancient, primordial, and deepest knowledge, the instincts, instinctual feelings, inner energies, and drives. Consequently, the aim of this self-realization path is our own parthenogenesis, or rebirth into union with the divine, by fully expressing the maleness in the female, and vice versa, to find esoteric wholeness. Adding to this, the spiritual meaning of androgyny as a symbolic restoration of chaos, of the undifferentiated unity that preceded the creation, and how the very goal of the mystical, monistic quest, whether that is in ancient or modern times, culminates in the merging of both the masculine and the feminine in ourselves in complete balance, thus dissolving creational distinctions and human identity. In other words, it is the marriage of the ego with the self and with God, and a mystical return to the state of Godhead prior to creation. It is where one gives birth to a divine child. In this instance, a woman gives birth to herself as a divine androgynous being, autonomous and in a state of perfection. In the unity of the opposites, she is whole. Such joining brings us to the liberating realization that our real higher self is uncreated and free from human identity, reaffirming androgyny. Existential philosophy gives us a means to ontologically interpret parthenogenesis in what is called as being in the world, or a dasein, a concept used by Martin Heidegger to represent their being, or the fact that truth is a task of uncovering the external world, and leads to internally realizing who we are. Equally, it is a process of becoming, which suggests that to achieve parthenogenesis is an ongoing, evolutionary, and self-transformative way of life that requires a woman to realize and awaken the theurgic, or most advanced, magical religious potency that exists within her fertile nature. This occurs by cultivating an ability to shift out of a common state of consciousness in order to make contact with the other organic forms of sensitivity and awareness with which human existence is intertwined. Our ancient ancestors knew that the mystery of creation came from deep within the womb and played out in the life cycles of every woman, in the miraculous bleeding, and realized that menstruation was not only biological, but had psychic powers which allowed women by their very bodies to embody the divine Virgin Mother Goddess and her creative powers. To borrow from Simone de Beauvoir and her infamous quote in The Second Sex, one is not born a woman, but rather becomes a woman, as a result of sociological background and embodied meanings one grows into. In the same vein, one is not born, but rather becomes a virgin as a result of sincere spiritual aspiration in feminist theological embodied meanings. One can reclaim their divine nature and birthright. This way, the divine is no longer the unknown other, but we embody the great goddess and her qualities as one being. Knowledge of this woman-led parthenogenetic path is highlighted in the Apocalypse of Adam, an apocalyptic text discovered amongst the papyri at Nag Hammadi in Upper Egypt in 1945, which is part of the Gnostic Gospels and dated to have been written around the 1st and 2nd centuries AD. The Testament imparts revelation of the esoteric mysteries and the gnosis or knowledge needed to thwart the archontic powers and return to God. This pre-Christian testament purports to be an account of Adam, the first man, speaking to his son Seth in his 700th year, about his time in Eden before the fall, and foreseeing the events of Genesis, saying, "Listen to my words, my son Seth. When God had created me out of the earth, along with Eve your mother, I went about with her in a glory which she had seen in the Aeon. These are intermediaries of the Supreme Being, from which we had come forth. She taught me a word of knowledge of the eternal God," which implies that Eve is the transmitter of knowledge about immortality. And the ninth kingdom says of him that from the 9 muses one separated away. She came to a high mountain and spent some time seated there in meditation, contemplation, or isolation, so that she desired herself alone in order to become androgynous, being both male and female, its union of masculine and feminine energies. She fulfilled her desire, meaning the Holy Spirit descended upon her and became pregnant from her desire, an act of parthenogenesis or divine birth. He was born, he being the eternal being. The angels who were over the desire nourished him, and he received glory there and power. And thus he came to the water, the element connected to fertility. In addition, Rosemary Radford Ruther, in her book Women and Redemption, quotes a Corinthian sermon from the early 2nd century. For the Lord himself, when asked by someone when his kingdom would come, said, "When the two are one, and the outside as the inside, and the male with the female, neither male nor female." So this sums up half of the 2nd chapter, and I will be continuing with the 2nd half of the chapter, which begins with the 3 phases of rites of passage in the next podcast. Thank you for listening.